Hi everyone, welcome to FRG Advocacy Media. You're watching the Journey Series video podcast. My name is Mark. I have a black and white beard. Today I'm bald and I've got a blue shirt on.
And I'm Crystal. I'm a white woman with brown hair and brown eyes, and I have on my brown glasses today with a tan shirt blouse. Tan blouse with the flowers.
And today we're speaking with CEO and founder of Accessible Sexual Health, Nellie Galindo. Hi, Nellie.
Hi,
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for
thanks
being
for
here.
joining us.
Yeah.
So go ahead. The floor is yours, I guess.
Can you start with your description?
Yeah, so I'm a light-skinned woman. I have blue eyes and I have brown hair that's pulled back into a clip right now. And I'm standing or sitting actually in front of a navy blue wall with some abstract art.
Okay.
So tell us a bit about your journey, wherever you want to start.
Yeah, so something that we were discussing before we started recording the podcast is I feel like I kind of have these two through lines in my life. And one of which is just kind of being my journey of understanding what disability is and what it means and how I fit into the disability community. And then the other line has to do with sexual health and sex education and what that means for me in my life, and then kind of how the two come together. So I said, I'll start with this side first before we dive into the sexual health stuff. But yeah, so and actually growing up, I'll start way back, I suppose. So my mother's sister, my aunt, actually she had a developmental disability. She was born with a very severe curvature in her spine. And she was born in the 1950s. And so back at that time, around the time she was like 10 or 11, her doctors were concerned that because of the way she was growing, the curvature in her spine was getting worse and worse, and it was actually crushing her organs, and it was going to negatively impact her quality of life. So they told my grandparents, we can correct her spine, but she will be paralyzed. But, it's kind of that, or she's going to have organ failure. So they went through this procedure. They corrected her spine, straightened it, but she was paralyzed. And what's so what I think is so interesting about this story is that this is in the 1960s, right? So we're, kind of just starting to get out of institutionalization, but it's still kind of that peak time where a lot of folks with disabilities were not living in the community. They were living in institutions, they were separated from their families. And I just think what's so interesting about my family's story in this instance is that, here was my 11-year-old aunt, and she had three younger sisters. And the doctors in the hospital told my grandparents, "Oh, this is so unfortunate. You're going to have to put her in a home." And my grandparents just said, "No, no, we're not. Like we're taking her to our home. Like we're taking her like where she belongs." And so they actually went to her school. Their elementary school was like right around the corner from the house where they lived. And they went through the school and measured every single doorway. And they said, her wheelchair will fit. We will bring her to school and she will go to school with her friends, just like she was doing before she went into the hospital. And my grandfather actually had to like carry her and her chair up the stairs in order to get into her school because this is way before IDEA, like this is way before, Section 504, right? All these laws, the ADA. And it's just so interesting to me how I think for my grandparents, what was just a no duh moment of like, oh no, of course she's our daughter. We're going to take care of her. They were so forward thinking for that
Ahead
time.
of the time, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just and so I think it's really cool that I kind of like come from that lineage. But then even growing up, because my aunt lived in Michigan, I grew up in Arizona, we would go and visit. And so I always had this like really strong role model of a disabled woman in my life. And I mean, she she went to high school, she went to college, she got married, she had children, she got divorced, she had her own house. Like she was just living life. Like she was just living her life. And the fact that she used a wheelchair was unique, but it was not like the only thing that defined her life. Like she had a very long career. She continues to, be part of her grandchildren's lives. She actually helped, she was a caregiver for my grandmother before my grandmother passed away. And so I guess I always just grew up with this idea of like, you can have a physical disability and it doesn't mean that you cannot achieve what any able-bodied person can achieve. And even, I just remember even growing up, and again, like not even growing up near her, but we would be out and about and my mom would point out to me, oh, like there's no ramp here. Like Liz would never be able to get into this building. Or, oh, like see how the elevator buttons are really high up? Like Liz from a seated position wouldn't be able to reach those buttons. This is an ADA violation. So my mom would just be like telling me about all these ADA violations when we're out and about. So it's funny that that's just kind of like the framework I grew up with, which I feel like is very unique and is not something that even a lot of my colleagues and friends who work in the disability community now, like didn't even have that frame of reference growing up. So I don't know. It's just such an interesting, like now looking back and what I'll talk about soon with just kind of where my career has gone, it's interesting to me to kind of look back on my childhood and my family of origin growing up and how that really was so impactful, but I didn't even know how much it was impacting me at the time.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so anyway, fast forward several years. Didn't even, think about disability rights. Didn't even think about myself as a disabled person or someone who had a condition that would be considered a disability. But I had actually um really struggled with a lot of anxiety. Especially around the time I was like 14, 15 years old is really when it kind of started to spike for me. And it was interesting because at the time I really didn't understand why. Like I was just consistently anxious. I was consistently scared of losing my friends, of something bad happening to my family. I was always just concerned that the world was going to end. I don't know if y'all remember like pre 2012 when everybody was talking about how the world was going to end. And I was
Oh,
I was genuinely concerned. So just stuff like that. Like I felt like I had a constant undercurrent of anxiety just like running throughout my whole life. And so and I mean at its worst, I was suicidal. Like I had thoughts of self-harm and I did self-injure at times. And so but it was very much just like lots of peaks and valleys kind of like throughout my adolescence and throughout my 20s where I was really struggling with just, how do I move throughout the world, accepting this or trying to fix it or trying to figure out what it meant for me. And I went to graduate school. I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So yay, Tar Heels for anybody who cares. Um, and I did a dual degree program with social work and public health. And I needed to find an internship for my last year. And I was having a really hard time finding an internship. It was kind of weird. Like a lot of people in my program did global work. And so they were going to, Zimbabwe to do, all sorts of things and kind of traveling all over the country. And I wasn't really interested in kind of living abroad at that point in time. But I did have a professor who had a connection to something here in North Carolina, which was called the Office on Disability and Health. And she said, it was kind of like a public-private partnership at the time. So they had an office at the State Department of Public Health, but they also had an office on the campus. And I was like, great, like I don't have to travel far. I can just like be on campus and do this work. And I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I loved it. I was just so enthralled in the work. And I think, again, because of my upbringing, I think because of also just knowing other disabled people in my life, I just thought, oh my gosh, like here's this whole population of people with all of these health disparities, like, just disparities in vaccine access, disparities in general, like healthcare access, disparities in mental health care access, just all of these things. And at the time, I just felt like no one was talking about it. It was just under the radar. Nobody was even acknowledging that this was the thing. And this was, I graduated in 2013. So this is around that time. And so I just really got into the work and I really loved it. And through that opportunity, I started working for the local Center for Independent Living, which is in Raleigh, close to where I live now, Raleigh, North Carolina. And so I started working with them. We did a couple different health projects. We got to go do like accessibility surveys of farmers markets, which was so much fun. So just things of that nature. And when I was kind of getting close to graduating, and at the time I just thought, I don't know, like I'll go wherever. I'll, move to DC. I'll, move wherever to get a job. Thankfully, the executive director of that center approached me and said, "Hey, we actually have an opening for an independent living specialist. If you would like to come work for us, you're more than welcome to." And I thought, "Oh, great." And it was interesting because at the time my supervisor had told me, "Oh, well, like they have to hire people with disabilities. It has to be at least 51% of their staff, 51% of their board members have to be people with disabilities." And at the time I was thinking like, "Oh, I'm taking, a role away from somebody who really needs it." But then I was interviewing with the executive director and I said, like I don't have a disability, but I have anxiety and I've lived with anxiety for 10 years. And she goes, "Oh, Nellie, that counts." I was like, "Oh, does it?" I I didn't realize that. And she said, "Oh yeah, like if it's impacting your daily life and it's, something that is a part of you, is a piece of you and your daily functioning, it's an invisible disability. It's not something that you see on the outside." And she had a vision disability that was more apparent, and there were lots of folks in the office who had physical disabilities. But she said, "No, like this is absolutely something that, you're going to bring your lived experience of living with anxiety to this role." And I think later on, I'll say more, but at the time, I was really amazed by how much I felt like I fit in, especially within our center. It was very small. There was only about 10 full-time staff who worked there, but it was just such an awesome, just kind of like motley crew of misfits. And I, like, for one of the first times in my life, really felt like I fit in and that I was just wholeheartedly accepted for who I was. Um, and I was accommodated for. Like, if I felt like I was going to have a panic attack, I could go tell my supervisor, like, I need to go sit in the office by myself for 15 minutes with the lights off so I can just relax. Or, hey, like, if you see me like crawl under my desk, just ignore me for a little bit and I'll be fine. Like, I'll pop my head back up and let y'all know that I'm okay. But even just that stuff, even just being able to say like I'm not having a great mental health day today, instead of having to like power through it so hard, was like just relief. Like it really felt just like such a shift for me. Um, Interestingly enough, fast forward many years later, to last year actually. So I'm 36 now. Last year when I was 35, I was working with a therapist who I had been seeing for about a year at that point. And it was interesting because we spoke a lot about how growing up, so my brother has ADHD and it's a very classic, like inattentive ADHD. And we were just kind of talking about, that experience and kind of how it impacted the family dynamic. And I made kind of a passing comment to her. I said, "Yeah, it's really funny because I'll see all these ADHD memes online and I really relate to them." And she goes, "Well, Nellie,
Well,
why don't we do a little assessment and see where you fall?" And I thought, okay. And she said, "Yeah, based off of this and based off of the way that ADHD presents in women versus men, like you're falling within like the mild to moderate range. And it was really funny because at first, kind of similar to my previous experience, I was like, oh no, not me, not me. Um, but the more I kind of processed it with her, and she's also neurodivergent, she also has ADHD. She was like, no, like this is kind of how inattentiveness can present itself. This is how hyperactivity can present itself. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is all making sense now. And and honestly, it's again kind of processing back and looking back, that was kind of like where a lot of my anxiety was stemming from. I was having to mask a lot and having to suppress a lot of just the neurodivergence that I had. Um, and it was kind of like just bottling up and presenting as a lot of anxiety, which was rough.
Yeah. The overwhelmingness of all those things that you have to suppress. And then when somebody, like you were talking about, going to a place where they felt validated and understood, and then talking to a therapist and her finally recognizing, hey, maybe this is something that no one ever looked into. And you're also talking about how it presents so much different in girls, and where most people understand that for boys it's more hyperactivity and being over, all these things, and it's not so much that. So
Hmm.
I can totally relate to that.
Well, right, because like I wasn't a troublemaker in school. I wasn't speaking out of turn. I wasn't making like a lot of fuss, but I was in like daydream land most of the day. Or I was having, I remember also specifically, I doodled a lot. Like all my notes were just doodle, 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 doodle. And it's because that was like a stim. It was like a way for me to be able to focus. And it's funny because now I have like, something that I manipulate with my hands. Yes. So so it's funny. And even yeah, I just started a new full-time role in marketing. And it's funny because I feel like I just kind of unmask a lot more easily now. So I'll put on music and I'll rock, like I'll stand up and rock back and forth at my desk, and I'm just kind of like, I don't care if people think I look weird. Like this is what I need to do to like move my body to be able to concentrate. Um, and a lot of that hyperactivity was just internal. And it was like all those anxious thoughts that were just kind of constantly running, 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 running. So yeah, it's been a year of discovery and also like lots of reflection back to kind of put the pieces together of, okay, well, this is why I was branded the weird kid in middle school. So it's been very validating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I've got mine too. I did show. Um, Now, to circle the wagons back, I guess you mentioned that your aunt or aunt, depending on where you come from, um, had a very fulfilling life, right? And we've talked about this. I've talked about this with my coach, boxing coach, and about nature versus nurture. So I mean, she had that very um that example from her parents of we're gonna make your life normal, right? Expose you to all the things that everyone else is doing, and you shouldn't be excluded from anything. So um that must have informed her attitude going forward from that point.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Crystal. I
But
cut you
no,
off.
I was just thinking, and your family, because those things that those attitudes pass on to generations, So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And she's definitely like a spitfire. Like she does not take crap from anybody. So yeah, I definitely think like her upbringing and just having the opportunity to grow up in her community was huge. And it's interesting too, because even hearing how it impacted my mom, who, up until recently, just due to aging and other things, didn't grow up with the same experience, right? Like she grew up able-bodied. She didn't grow up experiencing a disability like my aunt had. But even she said, we would walk down the street and people would stare. They would stare at us because at that time it was so unusual to see someone, much less a child, using a wheelchair out in public. It was so uncommon that she said she could feel like everybody staring at their family just walking down the street. And so even like by association, she was experiencing just some of like the discrimination and the ableism that was presenting itself just for existing. But then again, she has always been someone who is very much like, you do not point out differences, you don't like speak down to people because they're different. Like she very much instilled that in us of you just accept people for who they are. Like you don't, put them down for being different or coming from a different background or speaking a different language or whatever the case may be. Like she's always just had such an ethos of inclusivity. And so she absolutely like passed that down to us as well.
That is so important. The inclusivity and the just like you were talking about, also the work you started doing with the psychological safety of it's okay for me to share what I deal with and share what helps me be productive. If that's not there, then they're not gonna be their best and be as productive as you want them to be. So I don't understand why that's not a thing. Sometimes, some places definitely it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because I think again, kind of reflecting back and thinking about everything I've learned just living and working within the IL movement, the independent living movement, is like disability can be as much or as little of your life as you want it to be. And only you can like make that choice. Like I don't really honestly like I don't really talk about having ADHD a whole lot. Outside of a couple choice friends and, my husband. Um but for some folks like that's a big piece of their identity. For other folks it's not so much. And even the rainbow of diversity within that is awesome, I think. But yeah, you just have to give people what they need in order to flourish and be successful. If it's a fidget, it's a fidget, right? It usually helps everybody to just be open and accommodating and to provide the adaptations for everybody in the room. Very infrequently is it going to harm someone to just give the accommodation to everybody.
I wanted to unpack something that we were talking about earlier. Again, in light of your grandparents, what they did for your aunt, or there are other stories we hear where people maybe advocate or are advocating for family, but they're in a time which is way before our time right now. And the temptation is to think of them as forward thinking ahead of their time. But I'm wondering if it's the opposite. What if they're the ones who are actually natural and normal, and we've just been forced into this
Right.
box of conformity by corporations and all these other talking heads? and made to think the wrong thing.
I appreciate that. I think you're right. Yeah, because what seemed very natural and normal for them was so just in the current society that they were living in, branded as very unnatural, right? We don't want to see a disabled young girl in our community, put her away. But for them, like that's their child, like that is their daughter, and they are going to take care of her because they have the duty of care. Um, so no, I think you're right. I think, and yeah, I can see how it's tempting for me and for other folks to think of it as like, oh, they're so ahead of their time, they're so forward thinking. But there's also like many other cultures in the world where you would not even think to take someone out of their family of origin and place them somewhere else. So, yeah, I appreciate that perspective.
I was just thinking about that as he was saying that. I was like, now, I've been taught to think of that as forward thinking, and they were ahead of their time, right? But in my head, that's not how I think. We think a lot alike. Like those things were, think something back then, and it just wasn't cool or acceptable, back then. And so they were cast out, were seen as weird or whatever. But what if some of the things that we're doing that are seen as weird are not weird? And if people in the future were to say that was forward thinking, no, we weren't being forward thinking. We were doing what's right for humans.
Yeah.
It's much that they're forward thinking instead everyone else is backward thinking. No?
Yeah.
I think about that a lot, especially in regards to neurodivergence and just the way that we kind of expect people to operate within school or within work, mostly within school and work. Those are like the two biggest like settings in our lives, right? Um, but yeah, I think there's just a lot of things that we're kind of now just starting to catch on to that truly just are much more natural for just who we are as human beings. Even just kind of going back to my example, like the need for movement, recess times are so much shorter now, and children are struggling in school. And we're like, well, I wonder why. Why are these kids having such a hard time in school? Well, it's because they're kids and they need to move their bodies or, move it. And there's lots of scientific evidence to show this. Moving your body and learning at the same time, like it helps you to learn more. If you're memorizing lines for a play and you're creating a dance for it, or if you're playing music to remember something, right? Like there's so much, our bodies are really built for a lot of movement, and yet we sit in desks all day, we sit in cubicles for most of the day. So having the freedom to get up from your desk, I'll often go sit out on a patio at my office and work outside if I just feel like I need a break, if I feel like I need sunshine, or I have a standing desk, I can stand up and I can kind of move around a little bit. Um, just all these little things that are starting to become more common. But if you think about it, and if you think about just how human bodies are built and how our brains are made, it just makes so much more sense that we give
Yeah.
people the opportunity
But-
to just move their bodies, as an example.
Again, with that, it's even sitting down at a desk or working 9 to 5, or these are the weekends, these are the weekdays, these are all things that have been dictated to us, right?
Yep.
They're all just social constructs.
Yeah. And one other thing oh yeah, so I go back to this example from time to time because science is great, it's done a lot for us and it's helping us in lots of ways. But at the same time, like there's stuff we innately know as people and as spiritual beings. Like for hundreds of years, thousands of years, people have known that prayer and meditation is a good thing and it works. But for a long time, at least in the West, um, that there's no evidence for that. So, that's not something to be encouraged. Whereas nowadays it's a lot more it's if you want to be healthy, that's what you've got to do. It's a lot more understood.
Right.
Yeah, I can even think, I mean, even from when I was a kid, I feel like we used to think of health, and this is also, I think, something that going through a public health program has also kind of opened my eyes to. But I think growing up, so much of what we considered health, first of all, came from a very like able-bodied standpoint, but it was always focused on like nutrition and physical activity, right? Food and exercise, and that's it. Um, and we don't think about sleep. We don't think about how social connection is so tied to our health and well-being. There's an epidemic of loneliness right now that the Surgeon General has acknowledged, right? Like that, would have been unheard of. But that is so basic, right? Like we need other people, we need relationships in order to function, in order to be healthy. Um, Sexuality, which I talk about a lot, right? Like intimacy and the need for physical touch with other people is incredibly important to our health and well-being. Um, and I think it's just all these things that somehow I think we just kind of forgot throughout the course of our own history within our own culture. I'm now seeing like we're starting to come back to it. And I think to your point too, with spirituality as well, right? That is a big aspect of health and well-being that doesn't often get addressed, right? Your doctor is not going to ask you in your appointment, well, how's your spirituality doing? Right? They're going to get your vitals and ask you what you're eating and, check your weight, but there's all these other aspects to health and well-being that play just as much, if not more of a role.
Yeah. And I think there was a time where we were much more deeply connected with who we were. Like there were people living on the land, farmers, whatever. They didn't need to go to some expert to tell them what's what. They knew what to do and just innately without anyone telling them otherwise.
Right. And the other problem with that, we're talking about science, and so because people were getting away from being able to grow whatever they needed to make whatever the solution they needed for the ailment they had, right? Then, like you were saying, the Western world started saying, we're gonna push our medicines on you. And so that sent us in a very dangerous place. Not just that, but like we also mentioned the food, then they started mentioning, okay, let's eat this and let's eat that. Look at all these healthy things we have now and other things that has cost.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because I definitely think that there's a balance. Like there's been so much good that has come from just the science of medicine and there are pharmaceuticals that we need, but it can't just be one or the other, right? And it's always about like finding, or I just believe like it's about finding that right balance and trying not to stray too far away from just the innate things that are good for us. And I feel like I even felt this with my anxiety and my depression, right? It's like I can get Zoloft from my PCP. Like she will happily give me a prescription of Zoloft if she feels like I need it and I qualify for it. But that can't take over the fact that I also need to go to therapy And I also need to make sure that I'm spending time with my family and that I'm also like taking time for social connection and that I'm also engaging in hobbies that give me joy, right? Like there's always like the both and of it that I've definitely experienced.
And you might have sensed this. I certainly uh have had it from going to therapy. You want and like that's all well and good, but there's other therapy that is therapy without going to the therapist, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
you could talk to a dog or something or pet a dog and then I mean that's not gonna go 100% of the way, but every little bit helps.
Yeah. No, I always joke because I can tell like when for us, so I live with my husband, my two kids, and I can just tell like we're we're so much happier when we spend time outside. Like we're just always happier people when we've gone for a hike or when we've gone to the neighborhood pool or when we play outside for a little bit. Um, yeah, like you need those other forms of therapy, right? I know you mentioned also like spirituality. Like I go to a Unitarian Universalist church and I used to sing. I'm not able to sing as much anymore because it conflicts with my child's bedtime, but that's neither here nor there. But singing in a choir, it's very communal. It gives you like good mental focus, right? Like I couldn't think about all these weird thoughts in my head because I have to focus on the music and going from note to note and making sure that I'm listening to the people around me and staying in tune. And like that was always such a good reset for me, even just 1 hour a week. That was like therapy for me too. Um, so yeah, you definitely you need your therapist, and if you have a good therapist, they will tell you to go find your other forms of therapy outside of their session.
Definitely, it's a balance, and you can always tell when somebody is really working on themselves and understanding themselves and internally intact with through yoga, meditation, whatever,
Hmm.
they have an understanding about their purpose and stuff like that. You know, of course, the therapist would be helpful in like understanding, you're getting to that point, maybe you need some help uh first getting there. That's fine. But people can do online therapy, whatever. Of course, that's important. But sometimes they it can't stop there. You have to figure out internally what is making those feelings happen for yourself to not do them again, or understand why you do what you do, things like that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's like
Definitely.
it's like a parent trying to teach a child how to ride a bike. Eventually, they have to let go and take the training wheels off, and they just go.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
No, not really.
So, do you want to get into what kind of work you do?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back in time again
Okay.
to kind of describe that path. I think it's interesting. I feel like, for sex educators, it's always fascinating to me to kind of hear how people get into the field, strictly because sexuality is so taboo in our culture. Typically, if I tell someone that I'm a sex educator, I either get a very like, oh,
Ooh.
still like, whoa, response. Or more often, actually, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I have a question. I need help with this. I need help with that. Oh, that actually reminds me of this situation with my child or this thing with my boyfriend or girlfriend." And it always fascinates me just because it's so taboo in our culture to talk about it that when somebody kind of gives you that opportunity to, it's like they jump on it. Um, but yeah, so where I grew up, I think I had kind of like the very standard elementary school sex education that most people got when they were, if they grew up in the United States. You maybe had like your gym coach or whoever separate the boys and the girls, and you would probably
Yes.
watch like this awkward video about puberty, right? And the girls would be taught what a tampon and a pad were, and the boys would not be
Right.
taught what a tampon and a pad were. So, that was very much part of my experience growing up. But in high school, our freshman year high school, we actually had, I think it was about 2.5 class periods of what I didn't know at the time was an abstinence only sex education curricula. Um, and I want to preface this by saying, like, everybody has a different value around sexuality, right? And everybody has different spiritual beliefs around sexuality, and that is all well and good. Um, I believe that when it comes to a public health intervention, it needs to be scientific and factual and comprehensive. Unfortunately, the type of sex education I received when I was in high school was very biased, and very biased toward one particular religion. So, we go into our class, this sex ed class, and the person who was teaching us self-identified as a born-again virgin, which I was not familiar with before that day. So he explained that he had had sex before he was married and he was very remorseful about it. And so he prayed to have his virginity restored. And according to his belief system, it did. So that's the extent of my understanding of it. But that was the person who was educating us, a room full of 14-year-olds in 2002. Um, and it was very shame-based. So he actually had us do an exercise where we took a piece of tape and we had to stick it on our arm and then take it off and then try to stick it on our arm again. And now it's getting like kind of, got your arm hairs on it. It's not sticking on as well. Take it off again, stick it back on. Oh, now it's falling off. And according to him, this was demonstrating that if you have sex with more than one person, you're not as committed in your following relationships. So like, and that having sex before you're married, the one person you're only supposed to have sex with is the person you marry, like it makes you dirty, right? So that was like his way of demonstrating that. So that was the message I received in this sex education class. Not to mention that, again, this was in 2002. So at the time, it was also just very taboo to be out if you were gay or lesbian or transgender. I did not know any kids at my high school who were open about their sexuality. Many years later, like, would later learn, that they did not identify as straight or as cisgender. And so I remember at the time thinking, okay, but gay people are not allowed to get married. This is before, 2013 or 2015 when gay people were able to get married across the country. So I'm sitting there and I'm just thinking, well, what about gay people? They can't get married. So how does this apply to them? And I just remember having all these questions. I was just kind of like, stuff is not adding up. But I was not going to ask these questions to this person in class. I did not feel safe. Um, so anyway, I had this experience and I remember going home and reading it was like a 17 magazine article that had a pro and con list. And I'm like way like throwback to like 17 magazine. But I was reading an article that had like a pro and con list of abstinence only sex education and comprehensive sex education. And I was reading through it and I went, oh my gosh, so this is the one I got. And this is the one my high school peers need based off of stuff we would talk about after school, right? I was like, oh man. And this was also kind of, at the beginning of the internet age. So, we had our AOL dial-up that would, like make the noise when you logged in. And I mean, thank goodness I didn't stumble upon anything too weird, but I did start to do my own research. I would go onto websites like the Planned Parenthood website, and scarletteen.com was a big one. I would always go on there. And I just kind of started becoming a little sex educator. Like I remember finding articles about how babies are made and showing them to my younger brothers and being like, this is how babies get made and this is how a condom works, right? So I just like kind of started like gaining this knowledge and telling it to other people because I knew that nobody else was really talking about it. And again, like little, before being diagnosed neurodivergent Nelly, didn't realize, oh, this is like my special interest just coming, full on out because I was just obsessed with this topic. And I wasn't necessarily interested in having sex. I was just really fascinated because nobody else was talking about this. Um, so anyway, I go to college and I actually became a peer sex educator at my college campus. So I went through this training course where we learned how to facilitate and how to lead discussions and do activities and create trainings and workshops. Um, and I would go and talk to, the incoming freshmen and talk to the sororities and fraternities and just talk to any group that wanted us to come talk. And we were just, their peers and their educators. And so if they had a question, they could come to us. And I ended up writing an art, like I did like a column in our student newspaper where people would write in questions and I would answer them, kind of like a Dear Abby or Dr. Ruth of the time. So, so it was interesting. So I had like, kind of this passion. I was like, I really love this. Like, I thought I wanted to be, a music major. I switched my major to psychology and I studied like every sexuality course we had on campus. I took it and I was just like full on in. I was like, I really love this. Like, this is what I want to do. And lo and behold, I graduated in 2009 in the middle of the recession, and there were no jobs, much less no full-time sex educator jobs. So kind of had to put that dream on the back burner for a while. Um, and so then, flash forward again to, I've gone through graduate school, done public health and social work. Now I'm working at this Center for Independent Living, doing independent living movement stuff and disability rights and all the things. And what was really interesting is that our center, every February, only in February, they would have a 4-week class all about healthy relationships and sexuality. And I immediately raised my hand and I was like, I want that. Like, please give me that. And that really opened my eyes to like, okay, it's already not great in America. There is already a dearth of sex education that anybody gets, and it's even worse for people with disabilities. It is zero, like next to nothing. Um, and so I started leading this class, and it was for the youth. We had, or kind of like transition age, like 16 to 24, teaching this class. And it just really opened my eyes. Like I'll never forget the first time I told one of the participants, we were talking about pregnancy and how pregnancy happens. And he said, oh yeah, like the egg and the sperm go into the uterus, but then it moves into her stomach. I said, no, the uterus actually gets larger like a balloon and the baby grows inside of the uterus. And his eyes, he was just like, what? What? Because when you talk about someone being pregnant, you usually refer to their belly, right? Their stomach is getting bigger, their belly is getting bigger. He had no concept that it was a whole other organ that was getting bigger, right? So, so anyway, I really just like kind of started leaning into that and kind of throughout the local, I guess, North Carolina independent living disability rights movement scene, I kind of became like the disability and sex person. Because again, I was kind of the only one who was talking about it. Not the only one, I'll say. There were definitely like other advocates who, were part of this, but I just kind of like started creating that name for myself, I guess you could say. And so, and actually during that time, I had a colleague from my social work program reach out to me. She was working at a disability services organization that served folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And she said, hey, would you be willing to come and do your program at our organization? I said, yes, absolutely. So I went, did training and did all those things. And I remember a couple weeks later, her and I and a couple of our other social work buddies were all getting together, just having drinks like at a local brewery. And I remember she looked at me and she said, "You are so good at this. That could be your full-time job. Like you could create your own consulting company and do that."
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, I guess I could. I could, couldn't I? Um, and probably not until maybe like 6 years later, when she contacted me again and said, "Hey, I'm at a different company and I need you to come and like do some consulting for us," did I finally take the step and create Accessible Sexual Health and actually create my own LLC. So, yeah, long, long journey to get there. But now I have a consulting business. It's very part-time right now. I'm wanting to grow it into a full-time position. But it's just my mission to be able to advance access to sexual health education for all people with disabilities and just to give people the information they need in order to be healthy, to feel pleasure, and to also be safe. Because we also know that people with disabilities are much, much more likely than people without disabilities to be abused, especially to be sexually abused. And a lot of that is wrapped up into the fact that if you are not given the language or the knowledge to know what a healthy and safe relationship looks like, or even what body parts are called, you are just way more vulnerable. So that we got to today. That's what brings us here today.
Yeah, it is so important to give them that knowledge and the correct terminology. And oftentimes, you talk down to people with disabilities and talk to them like children.
Mm-hmm.
And let's wash this, let's wash that, and they don't have the so then when something does happen, they can't tell somebody what happened because they don't have the correct terminology. And the person they're reporting to has no idea what they're talking about. And we talked also about the nuances of they're just not being the correct kind of technology and the correct procedural ways to be able to report something if it does happen.
Yes,
So can you
it's
talk about that, please?
absolutely. Yeah. So there, and again, like whatever barriers we see in the system that impact someone without a disability, it's just tenfold for someone with a disability. So I think a lot of times, even just the culture of an organization, it's a hard reality to think about. It's really difficult for a disability services provider to consider the fact that someone within their organization would be victimizing one of the people that they are meant to serve and to take care of. That's a really hard truth. And so already, I think we already have kind of this culture of, well, we're not going to think about that, or we're not going to be concerned about it, or, well, everybody took their abuse training this year, so it's fine. Um, it really does start with that culture of we're not going to tolerate this, and we need to acknowledge the fact that, it is among us to be able to create a culture of safety where this is not accepted. Um, so I think already just like from the get-go, the culture of the organization or the service or whatever it is, like that's really where the majority of the change needs to happen. If there is an occurrence, oftentimes, like we've mentioned, if that individual doesn't have the vocabulary, doesn't have the language to be able to say or even to recognize that what they're experiencing is abuse, they're much less likely to report it. One thing I always like to include in my trainings, if I am talking about abuse specifically, is that it's not always physical in the sense of someone hitting you or slapping you, right? It's not always sexual abuse. It's not always financial abuse. Sometimes the abuse that people with disabilities experience is directly related to their disability. But again, we don't think of that framework. And so it's really hard for people to recognize it. So, for example, if someone takes my wheelchair away from me, if someone takes my cane away from me so that I physically cannot get away, if someone messes with my medication or gives me too much of my medication to make me more drowsy, right? Any of that type of manipulation is abuse, but we often don't consider that in the context of that person's disability. Or even someone telling you, well, you have a cognitive disability, so you don't understand this. I can help you, right? That type of power and control over people also has to be considered within the context. And then, let's say this individual does have the language and they are able to report. Are they able to report in a way that is accessible to them, right? If I have someone who does not speak, who is nonverbal, and maybe they use a picture board for communication, does that picture board have words like penis, vagina, anus, hurt, abuse, sexual abuse? Is that included within their augmentative communication system in their ACC, right? If it's someone who has a stutter, if it's someone who speaks, has a speech difference, would the person receiving that information understand them? Do they have a way of typing it out, of writing it out, right? So a lot of these things really have to be thought out of, like they have to be thought out very carefully and specifically. But then when it comes to reporting to law enforcement, a lot of law enforcement do not have the training to know how to effectively communicate with somebody with a disability or to effectively communicate with someone who may have a communication disability or a speech disability, right? Communicating with somebody who's deaf or communicating through that ACC system, right? So it kind of like each of these stages, we just see multiple barriers that present themselves. Yeah, and it's a lot. Like this is a lot of the work that I used to do working within our independent living center was, let's go do training at the domestic violence shelter. Let's go do training with law enforcement and make sure that they understand A, that this is a problem that is very common and is often not being reported, and B, if it is reported, how can you best support that person in their communication and also just uphold their rights as well. Yeah, it's a lot. It's not a fun topic, but super important.
Yeah.
We talked a lot, we talked earlier about, your grandparents and how they dealt with things with your aunt, and then other people who maybe weren't given the framework to understand disability. And if someone is not feeling like they are heard, or the person that they want to tell on or want to talk about in the report is looked at as someone of authority, or someone who is a top person or whatever, and they get to report it and they're not believed because they are seen as less than, or they don't have the words, the proper words that the reporting, they understand those words. If they don't have that, then it's not going to get reported. They're going to be scared to come forward. Or if they do come forward, then it's not gonna be, the person they're reporting it's not really gonna go anywhere.
Well, and oftentimes too, the person they're reporting may also be their caregiver. And so if you think about it in that context as well of, hey, my DSP is the person, my direct support professional or caregiver, whoever, is the person who makes sure that I get bathed, that I can go to the toilet, that I can eat, that my daily physical needs are met. If that is also my abuser, then I run the risk of not
Yeah.
having caregiving anymore, right? If I live in a really rural area where there are I mean, there's staffing shortages everywhere, but especially if I live in a really rural area where there is one provider for where I live, and that's the organization that is, that I'm needing to report to. What if I can't receive services anymore, right? So there is a lot at stake that can really impact how long people have to go through abuse before
Right.
they can receive any support. And also I think in the context of what you were mentioning with, my aunt and like living in the community, the more people you have in your social circle, the safer you will be. If you are only seeing that caregiver every single day and that's a terribly unsafe, like statistically, a terribly unsafe situation to be in. You have to have your natural supports. You have to have your community because the more people you have in your circle who can notice, oh, hey, I think something is wrong. I think something might be going on. Um, just the more likely you are to be able to have that safety net to fall back on and the less likely you are going to lose support and caregiving that you need in order to survive. So, I mean, community inclusion, I think is, it's something we think of all the time as disability rights activists and as providers. Um, and I think we think of it as, it's important because it's something nice to do, right? Like we're all going to be inclusive and help people live in the community, but it's a survival issue for a lot of folks and a safety issue and a rights issue. And just the more safe people you get into your network, the healthier you will be.
Yeah, and in some of these small towns, especially, um, so they're so close knit that sometimes the person you're reporting to is good friends with the perpetrator, right? And that's a dangerous situation.
Oh yeah, I mean I'm sure that there are situations where that happens. This is also where I am a little bit of an advocate for social media. Obviously there is a dark side to it. At the same time, that's community, right? That's another avenue to find community. It requires a lot of curation and nuance, but even having access to the internet and being able to access information. I mean, again, I think about myself, little 14, 15-year-old Nellie hopping on AOL. But I mean, that was kind of my lifeline. Like, that's where I got a lot of the information that I needed, that my friends needed. And I think it's the same today, where if we're preventing individuals from being able to access information, whether that's the internet or even going to the library or whatever, you're withholding so much from them to be able to find their community and to find their voice, and to find safety and connection as well.
That's one of the other really good things about that is that um we have built up these belief systems, biases, and misconceptions because our information was very much gate kept and given to us by a limited amount of people, and no, you only have access to this information because we think that's all you need to know. And it's kind of empowering to know we have access to all this other stuff that we weren't that was kept from us, but it can be overwhelming. And of course, there's a dark side, as you mentioned.
It is empowering and overwhelming at the same time.
Yes.
I have the whole of humanity just right here, right?
Yeah, the other, part of, it's part of this channel is about us empowering and giving people the opportunities. Like, we appreciate it when people like you come on, because obviously we can't talk as much as you can and as much knowledge as you have about this topic, but we can bounce off of some of the things. So it is so important. We're talking about the things on the internet, being able to find these support systems and stuff like that. We'd like to hope that we're doing some of that, to make
Yes.
it available.
Oh, absolutely. And truly, I think because I've even noticed within the last 10 years, disability itself, like just the word disability, is mentioned so much more often than it used to be. And I remember even, again, like 9, 10 years ago, walking into a training and really having to give a deep, deep discussion around just what is ableism? What does that mean? Today, when I walk into a room to do a training, I mention the word, most folks know it and understand it. And so, even just within the last decade, I feel like there's been such a shift. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've been able to create these resources and that it's so much easier to share your voice on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or wherever. And that people can find each other, right? Like we can find our community wherever we are in the world. So I'm definitely like I'm the person the minority voice in the room typically who's like, no, actually, I think social media is a really good thing. Um, but it's a tool and it's how you use it. And if you know how to harness its power, it can be really, really awesome. And yeah, I think you all are doing an excellent job of demonstrating that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Else?
Uh, did, so do you want to talk about now any new things you have coming up, projects?
Oh gosh. Yeah, so I mean, I can talk a little bit more just about the consulting work I do. I primarily work with disability services providers. I actually just had a training this morning in Raleigh, where I talked about values and how service providers can support individuals in kind of building their own values around sexuality and how to have those conversations, sometimes tough conversations with guardians and caregivers and families. So I do a lot of work like that. I'll do bespoke training or workshops. I'll do public speaking events. I also have a newsletter. So if you do go to www.accessiblesexualhealth.com, all one word. You can sign up for my newsletter there. I just have it quarterly right now, so I'm not going to flood your inbox with anything you don't want to read. Um, and yeah, I'm really hoping, probably in 2025, I'm hoping to create some online courses that folks can take. So that's my goal. We'll see. Again,
Keep
the,
us
the
updated.
ADHD causes some issues sometimes with getting things done. But yeah, so all of my stuff is on there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, and LinkedIn, so you can follow me on there as well.
So, aside from your website and all that stuff you mentioned, how can, if someone is interested in you speaking or doing a training or whatever, how can they contact you?
Yeah, so I do have a contact form on my website, or you can just email me at info@accessiblesexualhealth.com and I will get back to you there.
So we, again, we really appreciate you talking to us. It's been a very insightful conversation.
Yep, thanks for joining us, Nellie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget to encourage, educate, and empower someone today.
Bye.